Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on the foundations of finance. My name is Julie Coyne and I am the Marketing Manager in Executive Education at Imperial College Business School. We offer learning and development for executives in 4 different areas: finance, fintech and risk, innovation and disruption, management and leadership, and also health innovation. As part of our finance portfolio, we offer the Foundations of Finance program. Now, this program aims at giving managers the essential tools they need to deal with finance problems today in business. It's typically aimed at managers that do not have a financial background. Today we are joined by Professors John Percival and Franklin Allen. They are both finance professors and also directors of the program. So they are going to talk to us a little bit more about why it is important for managers today to understand and also speak the language of finance.
So, hello everybody. This is Franklin Allen. Let me just start out by saying that I'm going to be co-teaching this with John Percival. And can we have the next slide, please, Julie? Let me just tell you first a bit about myself, and then John will tell you about himself. So I was, as you can tell from my accent, I'm British originally. I grew up in the UK and was educated here. After doing my doctorate, I went to teach at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I went there in 1980, and I was on the faculty there until last June. The last 2 years I was on leave, though, because I came to Imperial College. And now I've taken early retirement, and I'm permanently here at Imperial. Now, during my time at Wharton, I was on the regular faculty and taught finance to undergraduates, MBAs, and PhD students. And I also did some executive education, and much of the teaching that I did there in executive education was with John Percival. And John and I have given a course which is very like this one that we're giving in next year here at Imperial many times in many countries all over the world. So we've done this many times before. So let me hand over to John next, and he'll tell you a little bit about his.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is John Percival. I taught at the Wharton School for part of the time, many of the years with Franklin, but I actually taught there for 43 years. I left Wharton in June of 2014, and I am now the Dean of the Business College at something called the Minerva Project, which is a revolutionary new kind of online teaching institution. I taught at Wharton in the undergraduate program, the regular MBA program, the executive MBA program, but I spent a lot of my time doing executive education for Wharton all over the world. And as Franklin mentioned, many of those programs were done with Franklin. So we are very used to working together in these kinds of programs. So let's talk a little bit about the program. Some of you may know that one of the most famous gurus of management education is a man by the name of Peter Drucker, who no longer is with us, but he's a famous name in management education. He has a famous quote that I think captures pretty well the essence and the focus of this program. Peter Drucker is quoted as saying, "Vision without execution is simply delusion, and the joy is in the results." Many businesses start up with a wonderful vision about a need out there in a marketplace and a way to try to meet that need. But unfortunately, it's never really translated well into a strategy which is well executed to produce good results. In this program, the definition of good results is financial outcomes. If a business cannot eventually produce good financial outcomes, the business is doomed to failure, in which case the vision has been for naught. So what we tried to do in this program is tie that link between good execution of the strategy and financial outcomes. We're going to do that through a series of learning objectives that we have for the course. So let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to focus our attention on how decisions that are made by people in the business do or do not produce good financial results. We start with the ability to read the three most important financial statements that are put out by businesses today. We use the word read because it is in fact often used in the context of financial statements. You read financial statements. But it's interesting, we chose the verb to read. If you pick up a novel, a great work of literature, there are words, there are sentences, there are paragraphs, but there's also a story being told. And I don't want to get bogged down in the beautiful grammar, I'm looking for the story. The analogy to a set of financial statements is there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of detail. But once you get through all the detail, there's a story being told about a management and how they're executing a strategy and the results that they're getting from that. And we try not to get bogged down the detail, but to try to find the story that's being told. We look at what's called the income statement, the profit and loss statement. It talks about, is the company achieving earnings from what it is that they're doing? We look at the balance sheet. The balance sheet attempts to determine the value of a business at a given point in time, but with a particular perspective. It attempts to look at the value in an objective, conservative fashion. And then we look at something called a statement of cash flows. We point out that a business can be earning a profit, but not generating sufficient cash to actually continue the business. We look at the statements separately and independently, but then we also look at how they interrelate with each other. And we try to tie those numbers to the decisions being made by the management of the business. Our next learning objective builds on that. Our second learning objective is then the process of using that financial information intelligently in order to find the problems that exist in the business and think about how to fix those problems in the future. We use that information to diagnose what's going on in the business. While we're doing that, we develop accounting terminology, which is the language of business today. It's revenues and sales. It's costs and expenses. It's profits and earnings. It's assets. It's liabilities. It's equity and net worth. It's cash flow. For better or for worse, this is the language of business today. Many people sit in on meetings in which financial outcomes are being resolved, but unfortunately, they don't really speak the language. So they don't understand the full impact of the discussions that are taking place about the problems that exist and how to try to fix those problems in the future. With our second learning objective, we try to overcome those problems. But then with our third learning objective, we build on that. Once you look at a set of financial statements, you can be overwhelmed by how many numbers there are. We try to say that there's no one number that's going to tell you everything you need to know about how well a business is performing. but do I really have to look at all of the numbers? And so we tried to arrive at a compromise, where from those numbers we develop a set of important metrics that are used all over the world to measure the performance of a business. And then we try to link each one of those metrics to the decisions that are being made. If you wanted to improve that particular metric, what would you need to do differently? The focus in most of our conversations is not going to be on financial decisions. It's going to be on decisions made by people in marketing and sales, in the operations of the business, in information technology, in R&D, but we'll tie those decisions to those important metrics. And so our first three learning objectives focus on using financial information intelligently, understanding how it's put together, and how the numbers come from the execution of the strategy of the business. But those financial metrics look backward. We use them to try to figure out what did happen and think about what needs to happen in the future. So in our fourth learning objective, which Franklin will talk about, we talk about that forward look at the business.
So now we know where the business is, from where it's come from, we can start thinking about how we can assess the value creation for shareholders of various strategies. And our basic tool for doing that is discounted cash flow. Now we start by showing that discounted cash flow is a very sensible objective if we're interested in creating value for shareholders. We explain why that is, why they all agree that that's a sensible strategy to follow. Then we look at the mechanics of the discounted cash flow. So the first aspect of that is, where does the discount rate come from? And we explain how to get that from looking at the financial markets, the financial sector. That's our opportunity cost of capital. If shareholders didn't invest in this corporation, where would they put their money with the same risk? And so once we've got a discount rate, then we need to find the cash flows. We start with the accounting data that John has talked about, and we show you how you can turn that into the cash that the owners of the corporation receive. And once we've got those cash flows from the accounting data, we can discount them back at the discounted rate. And that gives us a metric. We're going to focus on something called net present value, which shows the amount of wealth created for the shareholders by the particular strategy that we're considering. So that's the first step. Now, if we can go to 5, please. That's the first step in valuation, but what we're going to do as well is to show how to value the whole business. So what is its existing value worth? And if we were to merge it with another company, what would that be worth, and so forth. So it's a much more comprehensive use of discounted cash flow. So we'll talk a fair amount about valuation. The particular focus that we'll use is in the context of a merger and acquisition. So if one company wants to take over another or merge with it, how should it decide how much it's worth and how much should it bid? So we'll spend some time using these tools of discounted cash flow to use in valuation. If we can go to objective 6. Now, a big part of finance is obviously to choose an optimal financial strategy. We have to choose an investment strategy, a strategy that we can decide what to do with the business, as John was discussing. But if we do that, we also need to understand from the finance side, should you use debt or equity? Should you use retained earnings? How should you actually come up with the cash to adopt new strategies, new investments, to finance acquisitions and so forth? So we'll spend quite a lot of time on where value comes from in terms of the financing strategy. If we can go to 7, please. One of the very important aspects of financing and investment decisions is to understand different levels of risk. And what we'll do is talk about risk and how we think about risk in finance. It's rather different than risk when you first come to it. When you first come to risk, you tend to think about things on a case-by-case basis and an investment by investment. But what we argue in finance is you need to think about things in terms of the shareholders, and we'll argue that the shareholders are going to be financially diversified. So it's really the contribution of risk to diversified portfolios that's going to be the important measure that we're going to use. And then we're going to talk about how you can use some of these notions of risk to look at the performance of business units and understand how well have they done relative to the risk that they incur. Let me hand it over to John for the next one. Microphone, John.
Sorry. So during the week, we will have talked about how to use financial information intelligently to assess problems that exist in the business. We'll talk about how the important metrics that are used to measure performance come from the decisions that are being made. And all of that is a looking back kind of focus. Then we'll talk about how you change those decisions in order to get better financial results in the future. So we'll switch to looking forward. And Franklin will talk about that important tool of discounted cash flow as a way to think about the future and how if we change the strategy that might increase the value of the business. So at the end of the program, what we'll try to do is then go back and revisit everything we've talked about and see how it all fits together. And we'll use some examples of companies who do a good job of the things we've talked about and companies that have run into problems in doing that. And so the focus then will be to bring it all together, to talk about how those results that Peter Drucker talked about, the financial outcomes, result directly from the formulation and execution of the strategy. And in particular, the importance of effective execution. And that's where people like you come in, because you are the ones who are making the decisions that ultimately execute the strategy. And it's extremely important that you understand how the things that you do affect those financial results. It's important that you speak the language of business, which, for better or for worse, is accounting terminology. It's important how you understand how the metrics come from those decisions. And it's important that you be able to think intelligently about how, if we're not getting the right results, we need to change the decisions in the future. Okay, so let's then think about what it all means in our next slide. So then, who is this program intended for? Well, it's almost everybody, because people in HR, people in information technology, people in research and development, people who are in marketing and sales, are all making decisions that contribute to the financial performance of the business. But they have to be able to interact with finance people. They need to think about how finance people can be effective consultants to them in helping them think about how their decisions affect financial performance. And although they may not be finance people, they need to understand financial strategy and how it's developed and why it has to be consistent with and complementary to marketing and operating strategies. Next slide.
John,
Franklin, you want to take that?
Okay. So this is something that I think is a great benefit to each of you. You'll now start to be able to understand accounting information and how it's used in terms of finance, and also the basic concepts of finance that drive how the business is run. So finance is an extremely important part of your toolkit, and we will give you the basics that you need for both accounting and finance. Once you have that, it will be a great benefit to your organization, because you'll be able to communicate with all of the other parts of the company, as John was talking about. So why is the program unique? Well, Imperial College is one of the world's best universities. Its main focus is on STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Now, we also have a business school because it's very important to be able to implement STEM subjects in businesses. And that's what we're aiming to do in the Imperial College Business School. And this program is one of the foundations for doing that, for using financial tools, for thinking about how we can develop businesses, change strategies, and so on. So we're going to be based in Imperial College, right in the heart of London, here in South Kensington. Now, we have a few unique aspects from our programs. We have something called an impact lab philosophy, and we're going to use the resources of the college, the wider college, not just the business school, to give you some insights into various cross-disciplinary and experiential learning experiences. And the particular one that we'll focus on a lot is what we call the carbon capture lab. So one of the things that's very important with the recent Paris Accord and so forth is limiting how much carbon we emit into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. What the carbon capture lab does is it's an actual working example of how carbon can be captured from power stations and returned to where it came from to oil fields and various other places. And we'll show you how we can use the tools that we've developed in the course to make decisions about these kinds of environmental decisions that the Carbon Capture Lab represent. When is this a good strategy? When is it an economic one? When does it create value for shareholders relative to other possible strategies for controlling emissions? So if we could go to the next slide, Julie. This is the overview of the week that we've been talking about. So John mentioned it would be a week. We're going to start in the first day talking about the accounting statements and the measures of business performance, and then something which is a very important tool developed by the American firm DuPont about a century ago, the DuPont system. Then on the Tuesday, we'll talk about discounted cash flow. Once John has laid the foundations for the measures and the accounting information, we'll see how we can use it in the simple forward-looking financial applications. Then we'll talk about the Airbus case. This is a fascinating case which has been going now for many years and is still developing, which is, was it the right decision based on the information at the time for Airbus to develop the A380? And John will talk about that and use it as an example of applying NPV. And then we'll go to the carbon capture lab, and then we'll have the program dinner after that. On the Wednesday, we'll talk about capital structure and how we should develop financial strategy. This is the debt versus equity and the other aspects of financial structure. We'll do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon, John will talk about the Diageo case, which is an application of some of the ideas developed in the morning. In the final session of the day, we'll talk about the current global financial system. So obviously today is a very interesting time, and we've seen many things over the last few months which I think none of us expected. So first of all, starting with the Brexit decision, and then with the election of Trump a few days ago, and then we've got the Italian referendum coming up in a few days, and the French election coming up. These have all radically altered the way we need to think about the world and the situation that all of the firms that people work for are operating in. And we'll talk about some of the implications of those and of the rise of China and so forth. And if we go to the next 2 days, on the next slide, the Thursday, John will talk about Asahi Glass, which is a very interesting case of the Japanese manufacturers, one of the largest glass manufacturers in the world, and how they used various measures of performance to assess how they were doing. Then the afternoon, we'll talk about mergers and acquisitions, and then in the evening there'll be a group discussion of Emerson Electric. And on the final day, John will sum up what we've done during the whole week in the value creation session, and then apply it in the Emerson Electric case. And then we'll end with a program wrap-up and a close at around 3:30 on the Friday afternoon.
Franklin, if I might add, I think looking at the schedule, you'll see that there is nothing in this program that is particularly Eurocentric, that is particularly Americentric. We have attempted to make this as global as possible. The case studies that we look at, we're going to include Asian companies, we're going to include American companies, we're going to include European companies, and Franklin, of course, is going to be looking at the total global financial situation. And we have designed this program specifically to try to make it as global as possible.
Yes, as I said at the beginning, John and I have taught this program all around the world. So we've taught it in Asia, we've taught it in the US, and we've taught it in Europe. So it's been tried and tested many times. So let me hand over to you, Julie, to give a few technical details.
Okay, thank you. So the program is next going to be running on the 13th to the 17th of March. Actually, that's a typo there, 2017, so next year. It's 5 days in duration, and the price for the full 5 days is £4,925, and that includes all teaching materials, virtual learning environment, refreshments, dinner, and that sort of thing as well. So that's the complete price. It's located at our central campus, South Kensington, in London. And the way to apply is online. So I've put a link there to the online application form. And there's also a link there for more information, including videos on the program as well, if you want to have a look at that. So I'm in charge of the program, and I'll send you after this webinar all of the details. So you have the application form and the application process as well, should you choose to apply. I'll also forward you a recording of this webinar for your information as well. So we will also invite you now to ask any questions that you may have. How you do this is to simply type the questions in the question panel at the lower right-hand side of the screen. So we'll just take a minute now to see if any questions come through, and we'll try and answer those for you. Okay, so we have one question. Is there going to be interactive exercises on the program?
So It's interactive in several ways. There are group breakouts for case studies in which you will interact with your colleagues in the program to discuss issues in the cases. In the case sessions, we will get together and compare those conversations that you've had and try to reach some group consensus on what is the problem being faced by the company, what are the right ways of trying to solve those problems and fix them in the future. I am a very strong believer in the importance today of active learning. The whole process of sitting there and just listening to somebody talk, there tends to be relatively little retention that takes place. So even the so-called lecture sessions, there will be lots and lots of questions asked of the group to think about how you apply what's being talked about, and there'll be lots of opportunities to interject and make comments about the topics that are being discussed in the sessions. Franklin and I have, again, done this many, many times, and we believe that it's really, really important to have the group as actively involved as possible. So by active, what we mean is listen a little bit to some ideas, then think about the implication of them for you in your business, trying to apply those ideas to the situation that was being faced by the company. The case discussions will focus on one company because there'll be a common experience that we'll all have. But in those case discussions, we'll go well beyond that particular company and think about those issues in the context of other companies and other businesses and in other parts of the world.
Okay, thanks. And there's one question that I can answer. Are there any other dates scheduled for next year? We're only running this program once next year, so March are the only dates that we will be running it. So we will be accepting applications up until mid-January. So there are a few spaces left on the program. And then we have one more question here. I have 20 years work experience, but no financial training. Is it suitable for me?
I think it's ideal for you. You probably reached the point in your career where in some ways you're being very successful, but in some ways you're realizing that the fact that you don't know as much as you'd like to know about the financial implications of the things that you're doing and how they contribute to the performance of the business is vital at this point in your career. I'm sure you listen in a lot of conversations that take place that have to do with financial outcomes, and sometimes the implications of that, perhaps by experience, become clear, but perhaps sometimes they're not as clear as you would like them to be. And I think in order to take the next step in your career, the kind of things we're going to be talking about in this program are vitally important.
Okay, thanks, John. So that wraps up all the questions that we have. So thank you, John, and thank you, Franklin, for helping us today and attending this webinar. Thank you all for attending. And as I said, I'm going to follow up with all the details that you need for applying for the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.